Number 10. The kilometers Blücher. The reborn German Navy, Kriegsmarine, of the 1930s laid down a total of 5 warships in the Admiral Hitler-class standard. These were heavy cruisers by classification, developed during the period free of the restrictions put in place by the Versailles Treaty that followed World War I, 1914 to 1918, thanks in large part to the Nazi Party now in control. The group consisted of Admiral Hitler herself, as the lead ship, Blücher and Prinz Eugen. 2 other warships, Seydlitz and Lutzow, were intended to join their sisters, but the former was set aside for conversion to an aircraft carrier, which was not completed, and the latter was sold in its unfinished state to the Soviets. The newer class was used by the Kriegsmarine to succeed the Deutschland class, of which 3 were built from 1929 to 1936. On the whole, the Admiral Hitler-class ships were very similar in terms of machinery, protection scheme and armament suite to the warships they followed into service. Blücher was named after Gebhard Lebrecht von Blücher, 1742–1819, the Battle of Waterloo hero, and followed the original SMS Blücher of the World War I period into service. This particular vessel was lost in January of 1915. The resurrected Blücher displaced 17,820 tons under standard load and up to 18,500 tons under full loads. Overall length reached 665.3 feet with a beam measuring 70 feet and a draft down to 24 feet. Power was from 3x Blohm und Voss steam-based engines developed 132,000 horsepower to drive 3 shafts under stern. The warship could make headway at speeds up to 32 knots with a range out to 6,800 nautical miles. These performance specifications were very similar to that of the Deutschland class mentioned earlier. Aboard was a crew of 42 officer and 1,340 enlisted personnel. Armor protection reached 4.1 inches at the primary turrets, 3 inches at the belt, 2 inches at the conning tower and nearly 2 inches along the main deck. There were facilities to support the launching, single catapult, and retrieval of a trio of Erdo R-196 floatplane aircraft, detailed elsewhere on this site. These aircraft used to provide a critical eye-in-the-sky function for both artillery spotting and reconnaissance. 2 R-96 aircraft were typically carried. Armament was led by 8 by 8 inches main gun set and 4 twin-gun turrets. This was backed by 12 by 4.1 inches SKC/33 secondary dual-purpose (DP) guns and 12 by 1.5 inches SKC/30 guns. Close-in work would be handled by 8 by 20 mm C/30 anti-aircraft (AA) guns. 12 by 533 mm, 21 inches. Torpedo launchers were installed for good measure, and these were in 4 triple tube mountings located at the corners of the primary hull superstructure. Blücher saw her keel laid down in August of 1936 and she was launched in June of 1937. She was ready just in time for service in World War II when hostilities broke out in September of 1939, the German invasion of neighboring Poland. Her profile involved 2 primary turrets set at the forecastle and 2 set aft. The bridge superstructure was aft of the forward pairing and the main mast works were positioned aft of this structure. The smoke funnel protruded upwards near midships with the second mast positioned next. The aft superstructure ran behind the secondary mast and ahead of the aft primary turret pairing. Floatplane aircraft were positioned at midships. In April of 1940, Blücher was part of the German invasion force attempting to subdue Norway once Hitler's attention had turned from his conquests of mainland Europe to Scandinavia. She was assigned as flagship and led the German warships into Oslo waters in the late hours on April 8. However, her wartime luck was quick to run out for Norwegian coastal fort guns, coupled with land-based torpedo attacks, did her in as she took on severe damage. With fires raging, the magazine stores inevitably ignited and destroyed the ship. She went down where she sat on April 9, 1940, a victim of what came to be recognized as the Battle of Drobak Sound. As many as 1,000 personnel went down with her. While a tremendous victory for the defending Norwegians, the Germans paid a terrible price for their invasion attempt. which ultimately proved successful in the end regardless. Number 9. The USS North Carolina. When the keel of North Carolina was laid in October of 1937 at the New York Navy Yard, Brooklyn, New York, she was the first battleship to be constructed in 16 years. She became the first of 10 fast battleships to join American fleet in World War II. North Carolina, BB-55, and her sister ship, Washington, BB-56, comprised the North Carolina class. Following them were the South Dakota class, South Dakota, BB-57, Indiana, BB-58, Massachusetts, BB-59, and Alabama, BB-60, and the Iowa class, Iowa, BB-61, New Jersey, BB-62, Missouri, BB-63, and Wisconsin, BB-64. At the time of her commissioning on April 9, 1941, she was considered the world's greatest sea weapon. Armed with 9 16-inch/45 caliber guns and 3 turrets and 25-inch/38 caliber guns in 10 twin mounts, North Carolina proved a formidable weapons platform. Her wartime complement consisted of 144 commissioned officers and 2,195 enlisted men, including 86 Marines. During World War II, North Carolina participated in every major naval offensive in the Pacific area of operations and earned 15 battle stars. In the Battle of the Eastern Solomons in August of 1942, the battleship's anti-aircraft barrage helped save the carrier Enterprise, thereby establishing the primary role of the fast battleship as protector of aircraft carriers. One of her Kingfisher pilots performed heroically during the strike on Truk when she rescued 10 downed Navy aviators on April 30, 1944. In all, North Carolina carried out 9 shore bombardments, sank an enemy troopship, destroyed at least 24 enemy aircraft, and assisted in shooting down many more. Her anti-aircraft guns helped halt or frustrate scores of attacks on aircraft carriers. She steamed over 300,000 miles. Although Japanese radio announcements claimed 6 times that North Carolina had been sunk, she survived many close calls and near misses with one hit when a Japanese torpedo slammed into the battleship's hull on September 15, 1942. A quick response on the part of the crew allowed the mighty ship to keep up with the fleet. By war's end, the ship lost only 10 men in action and had 67 wounded. After serving as a training vessel for midshipmen, North Carolina was decommissioned June 27, 1947 and placed in the inactive reserve fleet in Bayonne, New Jersey, for the next 14 years. In 1958 the announcement of her impending scrapping led to a statewide campaign by citizens of North Carolina to save the ship from the scrappers' torches and bring her back to her home state. The Save Our Ship, SOS, campaign was successful and the battleship arrived in her current berth on October 2, 1961. She was dedicated on April 29, 1962 as the state's memorial to its World War II veterans and the 11,000 North Carolinians who died during the war. Number 8. The RN Roma. Named after 2 previous ships and the city of Rome, N1, was the 3rd Vittorio Veneto-class battleship of Italy's Regia Marina, Royal Navy. The construction of both Roma and her sister ship Impero was due to rising tensions around the world and the Navy's fear that only 2 Vittorio Venetos, even in company with older pre-First World War battleships, would not be enough to counter the British and French Mediterranean fleets. As Roma was laid down almost 4 years after the first 2 ships of the class, some small improvements were made to the design, including additional freeboard added to the bow. Roma was commissioned into the Regia Marina on June 14, 1942, but a severe fuel shortage in Italy at that time prevented her from being deployed. Instead, along with her sister ships Vittorio Veneto and Littorio, she was used to bolster the anti-aircraft defenses of various Italian cities. In this role, she was severely damaged twice in June 1943, from bomber raids on La Spezia. After repairs in Genoa through all of July and part of August, Roma was deployed as the flagship of Admiral Carlo Bergamini in a large battle group that eventually comprised the 3 Vittorio Venetos, 8 cruisers and 8 destroyers. The battle group was scheduled to attack the Allied ships approaching Salerno to invade Italy, Operation Avalanche, on September 9, 1943, but the news of the September 8, 1943 armistice with the Allies led to the operation being cancelled. The Italian fleet was instead ordered to sail to La Maddalena, Sardinia, and subsequently to Malta to surrender to the Allies. While the force was in the Strait of Bonifacio, Dornier Do-217s of the German Luftwaffe's Specialist Wing KG-100, armed with Fritz X radio-controlled bombs, sighted the force. The first attack failed, but the second dealt Italia, ex Littorio, and Roma much damage. The hit on Roma caused water to flood 2 boiler rooms in the aft engine room, leaving the ship to limp along with 2 propellers, reduced power, and arc-induced fires in the stern of the ship. Shortly thereafter, another bomb slammed into the ship and detonated within the forward engine room, causing catastrophic flooding and the explosion of the No. 2 main turret's magazines, throwing the turret itself into the sea. Sinking by the bow and listing to starboard, Roma capsized and broke in two, carrying 1,393 men, including Bergamini, down with her. Number 7. The HMS War Spy. HMS War Spy, 03, was a dreadnought battleship of the Queen Elizabeth class in service with the British Royal Navy. The hull of this all-new big gunship design was patterned after the Iron Duke battleship class. When on the drawing board, the Queen Elizabeth class was championed by Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty. Churchill knew he needed allies to convince the War Department to fund the massive project, so he persuaded Admiral Sir John Jackie Fisher to come out of retirement and help secure the construction of Warspite and her sister ships. They were successful in their efforts and Warspite was officially launched on November 26, 1913 from the Devonport Royal Dockyard in Plymouth and formally commissioned on March 8, 1915. World War I, 1914–1918, was already underway by then. The Queen Elizabeth class were constructed as super dreadnoughts which reflected their having more firepower, thicker armor and larger overall dimensions than preceding dreadnought warships. Winston Churchill was able to push through the 15-inch main guns being developed in secret for the Elizabeth class. In 1913, these guns were the largest rifled cannons of their kind anywhere in the world, making the Elizabeth class the first to be designed around this new armament. Her architects chose to mount the guns in 4x twin-gun turrets, all fitted in line with 2 forward emplacements and 2 aft. This was a change from previous dreadnought battleships which included 5 total twin-gun turrets. The decision to remove the 5th turret helped to reduce the vessel's overall displacement and provide more internal space and tonnage for a larger power plant, which significantly increased the speed of the class. Capable of 24 knots in ideal conditions, the Queen Elizabeth class of World War I were considered the first true fast battleships. The 15-inch, 381.0 mm, main gun barrel weighed approximately 100 tons and was 650.4 inches, 16.52 meters, in length. The shell was separate from the charges and weighed 1,920 pounds, 870 kilograms, on their own. When fired, the recoil of the barrel was 46 inches, 1.2 meters, and a trained, experienced gunnery crew could maintain a healthy 2 rounds per minute rate of fire. Muzzle velocity was rated at 2,575 feet per second, 785 meters per second. By the time of World War II in 1941, the maximum elevation of the guns were changed from 20 degrees to 30 degrees. This elevation change allowed a streamlined shell to have a maximum range of 23,734 yards at 20 degrees and 32,500 yards, 29,720 meters, more than 18 miles, at 30 degrees elevation. The 6 inches BLMK-12 series were chosen as secondary armament and all 14 systems were placed in casements along the sides of the hull as built, 7 to port and 7 to starboard. The caliber was 6 inches and each gun weighed 6 tons. The length of the bore was 45 calibers, 270 inches, and the weight of each shell was 100 pounds, 45 kilograms. A gunnery crew could maintain a rate of fire of 7 rounds per minute with a maximum range out to 13,500 yards. In practice, the design of these guns of 1915 was such that they were to fire forward for protection against smaller ships attempting to make torpedo runs on the vessel. The guns were close to the waterline and their use in this fashion proved them to be almost ineffective. Another possibility was to put 4 guns aft, however this plan was abandoned and finally 2 guns were placed on the boat deck. After the Battle of Jutland in 1916, they were removed altogether as it was found the gun crews were too exposed to enemy fire. The class also fielded 2x3 inches BLMK-1QF series anti-aircraft guns added in 1915. At this point in time, the general feeling by war planners was that aircraft could not sink a battleship-type vessel, therefore the need for anti-aircraft gun protection was a low priority. The caliber of these weapons was 3 inches and the length of the bore was 45 calibers, 135 inches. The weight of the individual gun was 1 ton, 2,000 pounds, and the shell weighed 12 pounds, 8 ounces. The crew could maintain a rate of fire of 20 rounds per minute. The shell's maximum range was approximately 11,200 yards. Number 6. The HMS Hood. HMS Hood was the pride of the Royal Navy. HMS Hood was a massively armed battle cruiser with what was thought to be armor equal to her armaments. To all intents, HMS Hood was considered to be one of the most powerful battle cruisers afloat in World War II. HMS Hood was 44,600 tons, had a crew of 1,419 and was faster than the Bismarck with a maximum speed of 32 knots. The Hood had been launched in 1918 and was armed with 8x15-inch guns, 12x5.5-inch guns, 8x4-inch AA guns, 24x2-pound guns and 4x21-inch torpedoes. However, the Hood suffered from one major flaw: she did not have the same amount of armor as the Bismarck. The fact that the Hood was faster than the Bismarck by 3 knots was as a result of her lack of sufficient armor for a naval battle fought in World War II. What had been considered sufficient armor in 1918 when Hood was built, was to prove a fatal flaw in 1941. On May 24, 1941, the Royal Navy tailed the Bismarck and Prinz Eugen when they attempted to break out into the Atlantic. If both of these ships had got into the Atlantic, they could have created havoc amongst the Atlantic convoys that were vital to Britain. The Hood relied on information sent back to it by the cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk. The Bismarck and Prinz Eugen had nighttime and sea fog on their side, and for a while both cruisers lost both German ships. However, by 02:47 on May 24, the Suffolk had regained contact with the Bismarck. The information sent back by the Suffolk led the Hood to believe that she would be just 20 miles from the Bismarck at 05:30 on May 24. At 05:35, the lookout from the Hood made out the Prinz Eugen and the Bismarck at a distance of 17 miles. Admiral Holland, on the Hood, ordered the battlecruiser to turn to the German ships, and at 05:45 they were only 22,000 meters apart. At 05:52, the Hood opened fire and shortly afterwards was joined by the Prince of Wales. At 05:54, both the Prinz Eugen and the Bismarck fired their guns primarily against the Hood. The Prinz Eugen hit the Hood and set alight some anti-aircraft shells kept on deck. The fire this caused was not particularly dangerous for the Hood, even though it produced a great deal of smoke. At 06:00 a salvo from the Bismarck hit the Hood. The Bismarck had fired from 17,000 meters, and the elevation of her guns meant that the shells that hit the Hood had a high trajectory and a steep angle of descent. The Hood had minimal horizontal armor, and one of the shells from the Bismarck penetrated the Hood's deck and exploded in one of her magazines. A massive explosion tore the Hood in half. Those who saw the explosion said that the bows of the Hood were raised out of the sea before they sank. The ship sank extremely quickly, within 2 minutes. And 1,416 men out of a total crew of 1,419 died. Number 5. The Tirpitz. The Tirpitz was a sister ship to the Bismarck and was seen as one of the most modern battleships in World War II. Ironically, the Tirpitz had an inglorious career, as she never saw any action against either a convoy or a naval battle group. The Tirpitz spent her wartime effort moving from one Norwegian fjord to another, and was to end her days in one such fjord in the north of the country. Launched on April 1, 1939, by the daughter of Admiral Tirpitz. The Tirpitz was nicknamed the Lone Queen of the North, but like the Bismarck, she ended her days in ignominy. The Tirpitz had, on paper, awesome fighting statistics. She displaced 42,900 tons and had an overall length of 792 feet. Her maximum speed was 30 knots and she had a range of 9,000 miles at 19 knots. At its maximum, the ship's armor was 12.5 inches and she was armed with 8 by 15-inch guns, 12 by 5.9-inch guns, 16 by 4-inch AA guns, 16 by 37 mm AA guns, 58 by 20 mm AA guns, 8 by 21 torpedo tubes and 6 aircraft. Her crew numbered 2,400. By any standards, the Tirpitz would have been a major threat to either the Russian convoys or the Atlantic convoys. As a result of the experience the Royal Navy had with the Bismarck in May 1941, it was ordered by the Admiralty that any attack against a similar ship such as the Tirpitz, would include at least 2 King George V type battleships and an aircraft carrier. The Tirpitz had been completed by March 1941 and started trials in the Baltic Sea. The Admiralty were very concerned at the prospect of 2 ships such as the Bismarck and Tirpitz being at large in the Atlantic. The sinking of the Bismarck took away 1 ship from the equation and Hitler effectively took away the Tirpitz as he believed that the Tirpitz should be used to guard the coast of Norway as he believed that any invasion of Europe would come via Norway. Therefore on the night of January 14th/15th, 1942, the Tirpitz left for Trondheim, going via the Kiel Canal so that the Swedish Coast Guard would not spot her. The move of the Tirpitz provoked the RAF into a whole series of attacks against her, all failures. Churchill himself realized the danger the Tirpitz created for the Atlantic and Arctic convoys. In fact, the Tirpitz was scheduled to attack the Arctic convoys as the Germans had, by the spring of 1942, realized their importance to the Russian war effort. On March 5, the Tirpitz left Trondheim with an escort of 3 destroyers. They were quickly spotted by a British submarine and the information was relayed back to Admiral Tovey, Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet based at Scapa Flow. Tovey had already preempted the Tirpitz leaving port and had sent to sea a formidable force, the battleships King George V and Duke of York, the heavy battlecruiser Renown, the aircraft carrier Victorious, 1 heavy cruiser and 12 destroyers, No. 4. The Enterprise. The 7th Enterprise, CV-6, was laid down July 16, 1934, launched October 3, 1936, and commissioned May 12, 1938, with Captain Newton H. White in command. The ship's sponsor was Lully H. Swanson, wife of former Secretary of the Navy Claude A. Swanson. Enterprise was the most decorated warship of World War II, earning 20 battle stars, 3 more than any other ship. In addition, Enterprise was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation and the Navy Unit Commendation, becoming the only carrier awarded both the Puke and Nuke for service in World War II. On November 23, 1945, Enterprise was awarded the British Admiralty Pennant, making her the only ship awarded the prestigious decoration outside the Royal Navy. Notable battles include Battle of the Eastern Solomons, Battle of Santa Cruz Islands, Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, Battle of Midway, Battle of Leyte Gulf, and Battle of the Philippine Sea. Of the more than 20 major actions of the Pacific War, Enterprise engaged in all but 2. Her planes and guns downed 911 enemy planes, her bombers sank 71 ships, and damaged or destroyed 192 more. Her presence inspired pride for the Allies and sparked fear into the heart of the enemy. After the war, her story became public knowledge and her name was emblazoned across newspaper headlines throughout the country. On October 17, 1945, Enterprise rejoined the fleet in New York Harbor for Navy Day celebrations on October 27. Moored to Pier 26 on the Hudson River, she welcomed more than 250,000 visitors, and rendered passing honors to President Harry S. Truman when he inspected the ships at anchor. That night, Night Air Group 55 flew in formation to salute the Big E. On her last active missions, Enterprise took part in multiple Magic Carpet voyages delivering thousands of sailors, Marines and soldiers home to their families. She was moored at Bayonne, New Jersey, on January 18, 1946, and would never sail under her own power again. Enterprise was decommissioned on February 17, 1947, and stricken from the list of naval vessels on October 2, 1956. There was a collective effort to have Enterprise established as a national memorial in Washington, D.C., but the repairs were deemed too expensive and ultimately doomed the project. Enterprise was fully scrapped by February 1960. Number 3. The USS Iowa. The USS Iowa, BB-61, was the lead ship of the massive and powerful Iowa-class battleships of World War II. She was followed by sister ships USS New Jersey, BB-62, USS Missouri, BB-63, and USS Wisconsin, BB-64. The battleship was born out of a need to deter the Imperial Japanese Navy from continuing work on their new Washington Naval Treaty violating designs and was therefore meant to pack quite a punch while offering adequate speed in deep waters. With the new and fast Essex-class aircraft carriers also being laid down for the U.S. Navy at this time, the American fleet was in need of protection vessels that could keep pace with these new carriers, speeds in excess of 30 knots. The design challenge was in developing a vessel fast enough to do so while also providing the needed firepower of a traditional battle cruiser to combat Japanese vessels in turn. The USS Iowa was ordered on July 1, 1939 and laid down on June 27, 1940 by the New York Naval Yard. She was officially launched on February 27, 1942 and was formally commissioned on February 22, 1943. She set out from Chesapeake Bay that same month under the motto of "Our liberties we prize, our rights we will maintain." She garnered the nickname of the Big Stick over her storied tenure. By August of that year, the USS Iowa was already on open seas assignment, escorting ships in the Atlantic and transporting the United States President, Franklin Roosevelt, to North Africa. It was not long before the system was eventually made part of the Pacific Fleet, where she would end up seeing most of her combat action concerning World War II. Once active in the Pacific theater, the USS Iowa took part in the Marshall Islands Campaign, the Philippines, the Okinawa landings, and the assault on targets in Honshu and Hokkaido. Her massive battery of 16-inch guns pummeled fortified shoreline positions and targets of interest. In the attacks, she sustained only relatively light damage from incoming Japanese artillery. The entire Iowa class was characterized by their 9 by 16 main guns, 3 guns fitted to each turret with 2 turrets fore and 1 aft. These were augmented by the 20 by 5 guns, and further defensed by 80 by 40 mm anti-aircraft and 49 by 20 mm anti-aircraft cannon systems. Onboard reconnaissance and patrol could be conducted through the use of up to 3 Va-type Kingfisher floatplane aircraft held aboard, launched by catapult and recovered by crane. The vessel's crew complement totaled 1,921 personnel during 1943. Power was derived from geared steam turbines delivering 212,000 horsepower to 4 shafts, which allowed for the required maximum surface speed of 33 knots to be reached in ideal conditions. At the end of the war, the USS Iowa served with the massive flotilla of Navy vessels standing guard in Tokyo Bay, Japan. Shortly thereafter, she was made flagship for a time until final decommissioning in 1949, only to be called back into service by 1951 in time for the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. Serving once again as flagship, she pounded enemy shore and inland positions with her usual precision and supported ground offensives in turn. Before the armistice of 1953, the Iowa was already on her way back home for a needed overhaul and further crew training. She was decommissioned again in 1958. By 1982, the Iowa-class ships were undergoing a period of heavy modernization that included the installation of 32 XBGM-109 Tomahawk cruise missiles, 16 XRGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles, and 4x20 mm Phalanx digitally controlled close-in weapon systems, SIWSs. These new additions surpassed the capabilities of the 16-inch main guns, for the Iowa could now reach farther targets with more precision and defend herself from incoming missile threats and low-flying strike aircraft. The 16-inch guns retained their ferocious value, however, and would be called to action again. The Iowa-class ships were reactivated for service once again, and the USS Iowa was used in the Persian Gulf for escort duties, providing watch over Kuwaiti tankers under threat. During a gunnery exercise observed in April of 1989, the USS Iowa suffered a catastrophic explosion in her No. 2 turret, second forward mounting, when 5 powder bags of the center gun ignited. The result was the loss of 47 souls, with the likely culprit later found to be static electricity of the 1930s-era magazines. This event led to several changes in the handling and storing of the powder for future sake. With the investigation complete, the Iowa set off once more on the high seas, this time to ports across Europe. By 1990, the USS Iowa was officially decommissioned for good and landed at port in Suisun Bay, San Francisco, California. On July 7, 2012, the USS Iowa opened to the public as a floating museum in Los Angeles, California. Number 2. The Yamato. The battleship Yamato was among the largest and most powerful battleships of all time. Yamato has reached nearly mythical status, a perfect example of Japan's fascination with doomed, feudal heroics. Built in 1937 at the Kure Naval Arsenal near Hiroshima, it was constructed in secrecy to avoid alarming the United States. Japan had recently withdrawn from the Washington Naval Treaty, which limited battleship tonnages, and was free to build them as large as it wanted. And what ships it built! 839 feet at the waterline and weighing 70,000 tons fully loaded, Yamato was the largest ship of the war, eclipsed only by post-war American aircraft carriers. It and its sister, Musashi, were armed with 9 18-inch naval guns, mounted in turrets of 3, 6 155mm secondary naval guns, 24 5-inch guns, 162 25mm anti-aircraft guns, and 4 13.2mm heavy machine guns. All of this firepower was meant to sink enemy battleships, more than one at a time if necessary. The extremely large number of anti-aircraft guns, added during the refit, were meant to keep the ship afloat in the face of American air power until it could close within striking range of enemy ships. Unfortunately for Yamato and its crew, it was obsolete by the time it was launched in 1941. The ability of fast aircraft carriers to engage enemy ships at the range of their embarked dive and torpedo bombers meant a carrier could attack a battleship at ranges of 200 miles or more, long before it entered the range of a battleship's guns. Battleships were outsticked, to use a modern term. By early 1945, Japan's strategic situation was grim. Japanese conquests in the Pacific had been steadily rolled back since the Allied landings on Guadalcanal in August 1942. The Philippines, Solomons, Gilberts and Carolines had all been lost and the enemy was now literally at the gates. Okinawa, the largest island in the Ryukyu Island chain, was the last bastion before the home islands itself. The island was just 160 miles from the mainland city of Kagoshima, coincidentally the birthplace of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The invasion of Okinawa began on April 1, 1945. In response, the Japanese Navy activated Operation Tengo. Yamato, escorted by the cruiser Yagai, commanded by the famous Tamiya Kihara, and 8 destroyers, would sail to Okinawa and disrupt the Allied invasion force. Yamato would then beach, becoming coastal artillery. It was a humiliating end for a battleship capable of 27 knots, but the lack of fuel and other military resources made for truly desperate times. Yamato and its task force, designated the Surface Special Attack Force, departed Tokuyama, Japan on April 6, proceeding due south to transit the Bungo Strait. American forces had already been alerted to the Tengo operation, thanks to cracked Japanese military codes, and 2 American submarines were waiting to intercept the flotilla. Yamato and its escorts were duly observed by the submarines, but the subs were unable to attack due to the task force's high rate of speed and zigzagging tactics. The sighting report was pushed up the chain of command. Number 1. The Bismarck. Over 9 tense days in the year 1941, a dramatic battle crippled life and swallowed the majestic battleship Bismarck. The German battleship was named after Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. In July 1936, it was laid down in a shipyard in Hamburg and was launched almost after 3 years in April 1939. Put into service for less than a year, Bismarck plays an important role in maritime history. The design was finalized by Hitler's navy after they rose from the ruins of the First World War. The biggest battleship Bismarck was set to fight the Second World War, and its main aim was to take control over the open waters. Bismarck battleship was almost the length of 3 football grounds put together and had as much as 7 decks above the waterline and 7 below it. The biggest battleship in the maritime history, Bismarck could reach up to 30 knots and had on board almost 2,200 men who stayed undetected by Allied troops. Sailing in the North Atlantic, Bismarck battleship's main aim was to attack the British supply fleet that operates on the high seas. On May 21, 1941, Bismarck ship moved towards the scheduled harbor southwest of Bergen, Norway, and was repainted gray so as to camouflage it in the high waters. It was the same day that Sweden detected 2 German warships among the fishing boats. Soon, the British Army sent Spitfire from Scotland, and hence the movement of Bismarck's ship was detected by the Army. Came May 23, and the day can be recalled as the Clash of the Titans, with Bismarck being spotted by heavy British cruisers in North Atlantic. It was 5:54 a.m. of the next morning that Bismarck witnessed shots from a distance of 13 miles by cruisers HMS Hood and Prince of Wales. In no time, the German masterpiece made way to the ocean bed for one of the British battleships. The other one chose to flee away from the clutches of the majestic battleship of the German Army. The battle, for now, was won for Bismarck, but difficulties arose as the firing created holes in the warship, and as a result, thousands of tons of water seeped into the deck, and in addition, the radar detection gear of Bismarck was knocked down, bringing down its speed to 29 knots. It was time again for some repair work so as to avoid Bismarck sinking. An Air Force plan yet again detected the battleship, and the chase was on. The ship now, reduced to 20 knots so as to save fuel, on the dreaded night of the 26th May, struck a squadron of swordfish torpedo from the British air carrier. The ship now lost control on many devices and moved towards a wrong direction. The next day at 10:39 a.m., Bismarck sinking was witnessed after many battleships fired at it. The Bismarck wreck had just 115 survivors out of the thousands that fought along with it. The short yet brave attempt by the German masterpiece was something that created ripples within the British Army in no time. Bismarck in itself was an epic and will be the greatest part of the maritime history of all times.